Super happy to have Snorre with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So you're well known in the world of architect. Can you tell us how you found a passion to create stuff, to build stuff?
Oh, I think that's looking back. That probably started as a small kid. I played with Lego for longer than was socially accepted, I guess.
How long? Can you tell how long?
Well, I don't really know. I think I had that well until high school. I mean, but I didn't. I had no idea that that was actually perhaps a sign of creativity or like a signal that okay, architecture could be interesting for you. So coming to that point in life, I think I was applying for all kinds of universities and very different paths, and I came to architecture purely by coincidence and some last minute decisions, and I think from there on I had a sort of for 15 years or so, sort of a personal struggle, whether that was really the sort of my path for the rest of my work life or not. I think through a few sort of bumps in the road and different courses along the way, that was how I discovered that this is really what I want to do in life. This is really what I want to work with, and use the creativity and sort of embrace it.
So basically, you had to look behind you and in hindsight to understand that that spike or passion existed from early youth, right? But there, when you were growing up, you didn't think like I'm going to make houses and cabins that are going to be well known all around the world, right?
Absolutely not. I was mostly making spaceships and things like that. I thought that was the cool stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine. Can you introduce maybe one project? We talked a bit about Manshausen. It's a famous explorer who was sort of like bought this island. Can you introduce that project, and then we can also show some photos on YouTube at least about the project and the island, because it's a very interesting project. And also, I think you told me that it wasn't necessarily meant to be this kind of project, but you saw that this could be a bigger opportunity to create something bigger and not just only create a cabin.
Well, I guess the last part is a bit natural because I'm the architect, and this was my moment to sort of to shine, to be able to really develop something interesting. Of course, we all strive to find projects where we can sort of design and make something meaningful. But Børge Ausland, the explorer, of course, bought this island primarily out of its location, beautiful scenery, beautiful location, and not immediately with the thought of a commercial development, other than sort of falling in love with this small island. And after some consideration, of course, he already has a good business of lecturing and team building and well, sharing his experience. And of course, the idea of creating a resort or something along those lines came to light, and then of course combined with his knowledge and vast knowledge of and opportunity to offer activities, and he sent out a request, a bit coincidentally also to me, and of course I, for my part, and very soon he also saw that this landscape, this fantastic site has also the potential for a development of something unique in terms of design, and particularly in how you relate to the surrounding nature and how you invite the nature. And then, an important part of his exploration has been extremely exposed to natural elements, and the opportunity to sort of invite others in, of course, a more comfortable way to have a taste of the same experience became an important starting point for the project.
Agree. So I think you said to me previously that you're not so into that the first idea you get is the one that you should pursue. You should sort of think about it more nuanced, maybe use some unconsciousness, and maybe take some time to let the idea sink in your head before you propose the idea. Do you think that's important when creating something, a big project, that not the first thought is the one that you're going for, but you actually take the time to get in touch with the nature, understand the environment, and maybe try to think, is this the right project the next 10 years, and not only is it the right project today?
Yeah, of course, those are extremely important considerations in my mind. I think there is in terms of creativity, there's a saying, kill your darlings. And that relates to the first ideas you get, they tend to stick, and they're hard to sort of work away from or discard, when even if it's fairly plain that they can't, that they're not the best ones, or they don't really work as you wanted. They're not as functional as you wanted them to be, etc. So, but for instance, for Vonheim, I think we had a long process, to put it that way, in a very rewarding dialogue with Børge, and the interaction with the client, to me, is extremely interesting and rewarding. That also gives some other perspectives, and your ideas are challenged, and you need to sort of be able to explain your ideas in a manner that also convinces the client. And that's, if you can't do that, then you might not be on the right track.
Makes sense. So another part that we haven't discussed anything about previously in our talks is that the way you choose materials, because I see this big trend, especially in finance, that there's a big opportunity to use better materials that will last longer and that are more sustainable. And I think you said that you don't really use plastic, and I think you make very conscious decisions about what materials you're going to use and how that material will evolve over, let's say, 20 years ahead. Can you give us an insight into how you choose the materials and why that is important, not just only from a footprint, but also like in your overall strategy in a project? Because I guess those two has to be linked together, both that is sustainable, but also that you think this suits the project.
Yeah, of course. And firstly, it's not always I get to choose either. So, but in the cases where I do, I think it's only a question of natural respect, both for the nature in general, but also for the people living in the house. It should be a healthy place to stay, and I think a lot of, let's say, not the very recent, but the later year development in the building regulations and techniques have been more focused on mass production, and a few sort of, let's say, political points in terms of energy conservation and stuff like that really hasn't been always in tune with a healthy way of building a house. And I think in a short span of time, we've sort of overlooked and forgotten a lot of lessons learned through hundreds of years before that. So in that sense, I think my ideas of sustainability is just as much relying on traditional methods or historic lessons than as it is on new technology. the combination of those, to me, is perhaps the most interesting.
Do you feel like you use the same type of materials because they all sort of look like they have the same themes when you create projects, or do you like to experiment with different types of materials? And maybe you can also introduce your favorite materials to use in cabins or similar shelters you make.
I think this also has a lot to do with your own background and with where you've grown up in the world. For us, growing up here in Norway, of course, wood is a very natural material for us. It's what the houses always were built of, at least the houses for living in, and as such, it has, of course, a personal resonance that's well, I know the qualities of it, and it's I'm on a fairly safe ground in terms of knowing how it will work, how it will sort of, how the experience of the room would be, etc., working with different types of wood, and of course, if it's sustainably sourced and properly worked and all of that, then it also has a low footprint, which is of course a goal in itself. And also, I do believe that, you know, the newer houses where you first found out you needed extra insulation to respond to regulations. Then you found out that became a problem because of moisture, etc. So you needed to sort of wrap yourself in a bag of plastic to avoid that. And then perhaps you found out at least that you needed to compensate that with some additional technology like ventilation, etc., which has its own energy consumption. And perhaps people were tending to be a little bit more asthmatic or similar. I think that just goes to show that you know there are other ways of doing things which could be healthier.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about specific projects, but just the way you talked about it now, I've seen some bigger projects that are very expensive houses, and it's marketing as this is the most sustainable house ever, but then it doesn't work because the technology isn't the right way executed, and then you have the big problem you're telling us about now. So this is actually not that irrelevant. This happens quite a lot in new projects that sort of wants to be this like new way of living, sustainable, zero footprint. Do you think sometimes we just like we go ahead too quickly, and maybe we should just learn from history and see that maybe there's a simpler way of achieving this than to make a very techish solutions on every problem at least?
I think that's an excellent point, actually. Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the problem there is a little bit of lack of interest and perhaps also, and certainly respect for lessons learned. When people put houses down way back in time, they used a lot of time to find the right spots. There were a lot of things coming into consideration, which we now today totally look away from. We're not even concerned where the sun rises or sets, and far less how the ground below the building is, etc. So yeah, definitely. And we all hurry a little bit too much, and we don't take the time to see how the longer effects of. But this has a lot of. You can use this on almost everything. So it's not something unique for architectural buildings.
But still, if you make something, a big block, that block is probably going to stand there for some years. So probably you should think a bit more about it before creating a software company, because you can just hit 2 tabs and the software company disappears, right?
Well, in today's world, I'm guessing some of the social media impact has just as big an impact on people's lives than that block. But yeah, but of course you're right. I mean, definitely we should, and certainly. I mean, certainly a lot of the buildings going up are well considered and are very good examples of things done very, very well. But on the other hand, a little bit of consideration on the ways is never a bad thing. But there are no sort of given answers to this. And this is now I'm moving into fields of expertise where I'm really sinking into the into the water. So that's, I mean, but the easier way of knowing that you are on doing something which isn't too harmful, at least, is looking a little bit back into well, perhaps tradition or historic methods which have been learned through a long time, and there at least you've had layers of knowledge to build on.
I agree, and just to put a very simple, maybe dumb example, but it's a reason why maybe your grandmother is the best at making fish cakes, and you should learn from her and maybe not the new producer with a new fancy product. But I thought we could talk a bit about the way you create sort of this, like maybe some of these cabins are what you are most known for. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, I think it's very interesting that you said that there's a different process creating a building where you should maybe spend some weekends and have the best weekend of your life compared to a home where you're going to stay and work and sleep every day. Can you sort of distinguish those two concepts? Because maybe someone sees a cabin you made and think, I want to have it like that at my home place. But maybe that isn't the best way to go about it, because there's some different approaches to that, because maybe you're creating on one hand a paradise going to be used 15 days, while on the other hand you want to have some other considerations in your mind.
Certainly, and of course, I mean, you would always try to sort of find and nourish the same qualities of a site. I mean, if it's an urban site, it's quite different from a rural one, of course. But so those are the similarities where you'd really like to sort of find them properly and you know, both use them for the best way possible, but also be respectful in that setting. But on the other hand, of course, the place where you're living, where you're staying longer periods, you have very different functional requirements, and if it's and that's there are I mean, there are even differences between any family you are designing to. It's a family of two who are always going to be two, or there is a family of three who are going to be five and then going back to be two again at a later stage in life, and then perhaps in holidays they'll be 15. So there are of course a lot more of different circumstances you need to take into consideration designing a home for somebody, which is good, and to make it work both in the everyday life and for the festive days of life.
When you look back at some of your most known projects that has been given multiple global awards, do you think the success factor is a matter of skill, or do you think it's a lot about intuition or a bit luck, or do you think that everything is at play at the same time? It's the right team, it's the right project, and it's the right skills and intuition that makes it happen? Or have you looked at a project and said, this was a success because of A, B, C, and I want to replicate that in other projects?
Oh, complex question. But in terms of team, skill is definitely at play. In terms of me personally, I think that's basically intuition or something. but and perhaps respect. I mean, it's for me the important sort of guideline is to find, let's say, a conceptual idea that resonates with a gut feeling, that you sort of have a good feeling that this is a good way to go forward. Doesn't mean it's the only one. Far from it. There are 1,000 ways to solve anything. But if you find one way which sort of resonates and feels good in all terms of that, then at least it's not a wrong answer. So and then perfecting that, honing that, and working with that may be more fruitful than trying to develop like 10 different schemes at the same time. So that's perhaps a formula that I'm often going back to in sense of developing a project. But before I can come up with any idea, I need all the input I can have for the intuition to sort of be useful. I need to know as much as I can about the site, whether it's a landscape or urban. I need to know as much as I can about the client, etc. And then when you have enough input, perhaps give yourself a little time to let the subconsciousness take part in the thought process.
How have you crafted your own creativity? Is it about being curious, or do you have a specific set of patterns you follow to make sure that intuition has the best chance of working the way you should? Or do you often spend time being curious about stuff that you think will help you make better projects?
Well, I think curiosity is, of course, a key ingredient to any such process, but it's also about doing very specific tasks, analyzing, working through sort of the elements you need to understand, and mapping them out as far as you can. But so you need to do the sort of the footwork, and then at some point you can sort of retreat a little bit to give yourself some space to perhaps come up with some good idea on the way forward.
Is it possible to you to explain a good day at your end? Because I guess every day differs, but let's say you have between 10 and 30 different projects going on at the same time. You can't be involved in every project every day, I guess, but how would you structure a perfect day to make sure that your output is as good as you think it can be, maximum?
The client's listening on this? No, I'm kidding.
I have no idea.
No.
I have no idea.
No, I mean, the fortunate thing about, yes, I do have 20, 30, or perhaps so projects going on at the same time. But, these are they're all moving parts. And some they stop for a moment of time, and others are a bit, we are pressed for time, etc. So, of course, but when you look away from all that, which is the sort of daily juggling of different tasks, then the best periods are the ones where you really work, where you've done all this footwork that I talked about, and you're starting to sort of get the ideas coming, and you start to work on them, and you start to sort of work on ideas and test them out, and the early work of that is well, that's just magical.
So I think, I don't know if you agree, but I feel sometimes in creative work, people try to measure it based on the hours you work. But sometimes I feel if you did your homework, then suddenly 2 hours can make the process of maybe 100 hours, because suddenly you're connecting the dots all together. And do you think that's kind of like common in creative stuff, that sometimes you do the footwork and the project stands still, but suddenly you have that spark that suddenly okay, now I see the next 5 months that we're going, and that is actually worth maybe thousands of hours, because in creativity you can't really force it, can you? I don't think Snorre can sit down and say, I will solve this today, and then just put an all-nighter, and then the project is finished in his head. Do you feel like you have to use some serendipity in order to get those massive projects that maybe are recognized 10 years later?
Yeah, I mean, you can't force it, that's for sure. But of course, at some point it helps having a deadline too. So you have to sit down, and you have to really, now I need to solve this. So the pressure of having the time pressure itself also creates a focus that to me is necessary, and is a good element of a creative process. But I mean, this is not something you can measure in hours. It's the output at the end which is important. And anyway, how are you going to note down hours if you are sort of lying, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, and then you have a thought which you need to put down on paper, and you get to sleep again, and then oh no, and then you do something else, or you walk and you need to take a walk to or go for a hike, and then suddenly the inspiration sort of comes from that. I mean, because you're constantly thinking, you're constantly working on the project, but you're not sitting in front of the computer, perhaps working in something which can be shown in 100 different diagrams or sketches. We work in different ways, I think, people. And some, I think, need to sort of work through things like sketching or building models, and others. For others, it's more of a mental process where you need to sort of think things through, work it like a model in your mind, etc.
But I think the biggest problem is that today we kind of work like we did when we were running factories, right? You were to do one task, and that's why also the school system, there's a reason why we're all sitting the way we're sitting, because it's based on the factory or the industrial revolution. So it's very interesting that when the tasks become more and more creative, I don't think you should use the structure you used to run a factory, arriving at 8, going home at 4, punching in and punching out.
Absolutely not, and I'm certainly not doing that. We couldn't have had this at 8, that's for sure. No, perhaps in the evening. But then
exactly.
we would be making dinner. No, I mean, also so to be able to work from different, and now we can work from any place. So I mean, working from home today. Or I might be in the office tomorrow, or in a cafe, or I might be when I'm traveling. Of course, I'm working and I'm seeing new places. I'm sort of working when I'm traveling on the ways, or just finding a good spot to sit and work wherever I am. That's just you need to be able to sort of make your own mind space to do that. For me, at least, that's the key to that. I can work anywhere, so regardless of what's going on around me, I guess, and not completely regardless, of course, but mostly. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's part of the problem, that we don't really know how to measure. And an architectural studio typically will invoice based on hours, on hourly production, and I think that's a problem, because then you need to be producing. You need to be able to sort of work diagrams or sketches for the hours that you are charging, and that work may both be not very let's say rewarding in terms of the output, or it may even be putting things too hard, and you're working. A lot of this has to do with finding the right directions to develop something. Using as little time as possible working on things that aren't fruitful at all, or maybe even completely the wrong answer to what you're doing or working to solve.
I totally agree. Just the last few questions. There's so many out there that wants to make a living of their passion. We know that's very hard, and it's very hard to be a generalist giving advice and say, do this and you'll succeed. But I mean, if you were forced to give your best knowledge on how to succeed at your passion, could one option be to sort of think about your childhood and try to remember what you initially liked to do? you talked about the Legos, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes I think people forget that maybe what they were interested in at 10 years old, probably there is some spark there, and maybe they should go back and visit that place, at least in their mind, and see. When no one was asking me to do anything as a 10-year-old kid, right? You do whatever you want after school. What did you do? Did you be on the computer, or did you run outside? Because maybe that's a hint, at least, into what you can achieve as a grown-up, where you have responsibility and actually you need to get paid in order to live of it, right? You can't just do it because you like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to some extent, I certainly agree. And then, of course, on the other side, if we were to apply that to my kids, at least the youngest one, he would just be playing video games for his whole life. which might not really be the passion of his life, but that's what you do these days. So I mean, to some extent, you also need to be sort of pushed into situations where you need to sort of make something out of that. To me, I think it's difficult because it's important. The most important thing is that we are different people. And that's perhaps where we have the most to contribute in terms of the broader development of things. And then, of course, on the other hand, to be able to follow your own path, you need to first of all, you need to sort of take that step and believe in yourself. But you need also to do it on a path which really interests you, which you really find rewarding, and rewarding enough to spend almost all your time doing just that. And for some people, the most interesting things, and perhaps for quite a lot of people, is the time spent after work, where you really don't have to sort of produce anything. You can just be totally free. And that might not always be something you can combine with making a living of.
I think that's super important, because you can't get everything in life, right? You can't have the most freedom and go on all vacations and as well be excellent in your profession, right? Can you just use maybe 1-2 minutes to say, when you say hard work, what does it actually mean in terms of hours or sacrifices? Because many people say that you have to work hard, but not so many explains the consequences of working hard.
Well, the consequences of working hard, I mean, there is a balance, and I think you need to, or at least for my part, I need to find a balance. I think that's healthy for me, and I think it's certainly healthy for the family. But that also gives a lot in return. I mean, being able to sort of keep a balance in that also gives me other perspectives to what I'm doing than rather only working hard. If you just do that, you might not be able to be joy enough to really understand what you're doing or reflecting on it enough. But of course, a creative process may sort of absorb almost all the energy you have, because you're putting everything into it, and you're working. I mean, you're working all the time, and I'm constantly sort of in my mind, different aspects of a project or different projects are always turning around, and some I try to push back to sort of give the subconsciousness a little space, because I think or I have a hope that the intelligence is a little bit more than just my analytical brain, part of the brain would sort of be able to give, and being sort of give enough space for some intuitivity or subconsciousness. I think is an excellent tool to be able to do something a little bit more interesting in each task you're given. But yeah, I mean, it's in terms of hours. No, you can't really measure it, because it's
constantly, right, in your head.
It will be constant.
but just the last question before we wrap up, in terms of sleep, and if you can start maybe in your 20s and up to date, do you have the same prioritization about sleep, or has that changed in your mind in terms of how well you feel at work? Because there's a huge trend in terms of sleep, and someone thinks it's a competition to get 10 hours today because sleep is the most important thing in life. But of course, it's individual, right? So it's not like we can't say this is the right amount of sleep. But since you are a creative person, how have you found sleep to how does it affect you, basically, if you sleep well for 1 week or super bad in 1 week or months?
I guess I'm like a sort of the perfect soldier. I can sleep anywhere, anytime. Then no problems. I'm sleeping on airplanes. I'm sleeping standing up or lying down. Just takes me 2 seconds. It annoys my wife to almost crazy because she does not.
Do you know how you do it, or is it just born? Or do you have a method to sleep in 2 seconds if you're standing up?
Well, first of all, you need to close the eyes, and then secondly, of course, you might need to put a little effort into sort of clearing your mind, and sometimes it's just too cluttered. So what I do sometimes when it's just too much, you can't really let go of all the things you're thinking of. And I just invite all the thoughts I have at once, and that becomes too much anyway. So I fall asleep from that. So, but yeah, of course. I mean, I think during studying, for example, I experimented with that. I mean, you were looking to get good grades, etc. So I would for a couple of semesters, I would almost not sleep at all. You know, for a month, I would only sleep 2 hours a day, and then work to sort of maximize the output. And I just got exactly the same grade as I did before, and the output was not even that good, but the amount of work done was of course weighing the other direction. So I think I learned from that you know, the one thing, like we talked, you can't force it, and the other thing is you need a little bit. There is effective work and there is just work. So you need to sort of conserve your energy and harness that for when you need it. Yeah.
It's sort of I don't know if you're familiar with the Pareto rule, but basically that 20% of the output is basically the result. So you should just maximize on that 20%, because, you know, you can seem quite busy if you have a job that's sort of your own company. You can be in meetings, you can take phone calls, but does it really add value to the project? Probably not every time.
That's an excellent point, actually, because we spend far too much time answering emails, responding to different kind of requests, either by email or phone, and that's all something. They all take a little bit of energy. They all take a little bit of focus away from where you really should be working. So being able to sort of how should I put, filter some of that, I think is probably a key. Yeah.
Totally agree. Okay, let's end it there. Thank you so much for joining, Snorre. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Christopher here again. Just a few things before you leave the show. If you like this episode, it would be great if you could give it a review and also share it with your professional network. If you want to get in touch with me, Twitter is the place. Just go to @ChrisVonheim. You can also find this information in the show notes. Hope to see you tune in to the next episode, and take care.